I realized something for those who have not been around for Overwatch from the beginning, and seeing its entire evolution, why some people fell out of love for the game and sort of what's changed. And I think a lot of times people look very similarly with Widowmaker in that like one dimensional sort of way of just like, oh, in order to fix Widowmaker, we need to nerf her one shot because it's really annoying to me right now. When in my mind, like I said in my video, the issue to Widowmaker is not the one shot; it's the things keeping her alive. It's the map design. Uh, it's a whole variety of different things. And what's changed in Overwatch and how it's gone from a wacky group of heroes and different skills and a variety of things to just more so like an FPS uh, game and a sit back and shoot play style has been the need for consistent damage, the need for consistent or burst damage in order to cut through a lot of the problems. Now, originally, back in the day, and some people might have felt this with Overwatch Classic, was that in order to get a kill, it required far less damage. If you notice someone make a mistake, you could capitalize on that mistake much quicker and punish them and kill them for it. That's what made it fun. And that's what makes Marvel Rivals fun, is that when you recognize that someone has made a crucial mistake, a crucial error, you have the abilities to capitalize on said mistake and punish them for it and help you win the game. Um, there are immortalities and things uh, in Marvel Rivals, but the margin for error on them is much higher than there is for Overwatch, so they're not used as frequently, and they're at least a little bit more difficult to pull off. Um, but as Overwatch has gone on, yes, immortalities were added to the game, uh, but that wasn't just the only thing that changed it. Uh, if you look back at the original support roster, we had a Lucio, Zenyatta, and Mercy. That was it. Now, what you're going to notice about these things is they had major trade offs. Lucio was mostly used for his speed boost. His AoE heals were good, but they were low, right? Like there was a trade off in the fact that if you had a Lucio, you probably weren't using him for the heals. A Zenyatta, you were trading off heals for damage. The Discord it helped out a bunch, but so did the fact that he could dish out a crap ton of damage himself. But he had low mobility, so he was very vulnerable. You had Mercy, who had high heals, good mobility, but very low damage output. And she had to at least be close to her target, right? So even though she had high heal potential, there was a trade-off of needing to be close to whoever she was healing. So she had to constantly be moving around, right? But it was all single target. There was no AoE large amount of healing, right? So those were the only three. And then you had Ana get added. Ana, who had a lot of potential. She could stop other people from getting healed. She could use the sleep dart. She had a nano boost, which was great. She could output heals or output damage, and it was all skill based. It was lots of margin for error, but because of the fact that there was that margin for error, there's also high potential in how she could be played and how she could be used. But the trade off was a lack of mobility. Hmm. So these were the only supports, and the game felt fine. You know, you still had heroes like Junkrat and Mei doing well. You still had characters that sort of like it felt like there was more options. It felt like you could still do stuff because of the fact that when you have heroes that have inconsistent damage, like Junkrat or Torb or Mei at times, uh, you need other supports that don't heal as much or they don't have as consistent healing output, right? But then you look at the supports that got added afterwards, you know, Moira, Baptiste, Brig. And what do you notice about those three supports? All of a sudden now, the amount of healing output available has increased dramatically. The ability to get, you know, a massive AoE aura wherever you sort of hit an enemy as Brig, as long as you hit with like your whip shot or something. Plus, from across the map, she can press E and just automatically deliver someone a pack, no margin for error. All of a sudden, the healing has increased dramatically, right? So now if you're Junkrat and you're spamming someone on a corner, before someone might have accidentally died here and there because of the fact that you're hitting bank shots in the right spot. But now Brig, who happened to be not looking, uh, was whip-shotting a tank or something, cast an AoE or a heal, and was affecting the person that Junkrat was aiming at. There was not even a need for her to look over there, and it might have affected their fight, their 1v1 that they might have been taking before. Bap, who is splash damage, um, the margin for error was lower, and if he was just sitting there spamming splash damage in his team, he was still healing where it just it, it doesn't require as much skill, as much of a trade-off as there was for Ana or Mercy of just like having that knowledge of like who do I prioritize to heal in this moment. And Moira's Moira. Like it's just the trade-off is she has to be closer to her target at least, but even then her heal orb is like still an AoE thing. You see how like the heals now are changing from being like Lucio, who was minimal heals, but AoE. And at times, occasionally could give like a burst radius, but he still had to be like near people for it. Now we're getting to a point where we're getting closer and closer to massive amounts of heals that are AoE and they're getting farther and farther away in range. And they're able to cover more ground and more space, right? Now, all of a sudden, because you have these AoE heals that are both AoE and consistent, the damage heroes that are inconsistent have a direct nerf to them. And this is where I didn't realize that maybe a lot of players are thinking about it in this way, but there are more counters in Overwatch than just like uh on the DPS roster, right? Like we know like Widow counters Pharah and whatnot, and Pharah counters Junkrat, but Junkrat is countered by anyone that can basically output consistent healing. And which is the reason why Junkrat needs his one shot combo in order to function at all in the game, because of the fact that once healing became more consistent, easier to do, and with the added immortality, the only thing that tends to work in terms of actually being able to win a fight or win a game is consistent damage or burst, which is the reason why Overwatch 2 is in the state that it's in, that the heroes that do the best and can shut down a lobby the best anyone that can output consistent damage or burst damage or both, right? That's the reason why a good Widow can shut down a team and the other team doesn't feel like they can do anything because she can change the fight entirely while you are trying to whittle someone down who's made a mistake. Even if you get close, as long as they just like wait for the immortality and play a bit safer and just give their Widow time to pop off, you'll never cut through, right? So supports in Overwatch, like because of the fact that they lack that margin of error, because of the fact that it's so easy for a lot of them to do what they do, it's a direct nerf to all of the other heroes that are a bit more oddball and interesting, right? And it's like let's take a look here and I'm going to highlight all of the circle in red every support that doesn't require aiming to heal, right? Doesn't require to aim to heal, doesn't require aim to heal. Doesn't require aim to heal, but there is trade-offs for him. Doesn't require aim to heal, 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 doesn't require aim to heal. And I'm throwing BAP in there too because like it's still just splash AoE damage, right? This is the roster. Now tell me, out of all these characters that don't need to aim to heal, is their healing output low for the trade-off of not needing to aim? Because, I'd say for these two, it's low. But the rest of them, all of these heroes here, there's no trade-off to having easy aim. The healing is not low by any measure, right? So when you have that much consistent high healing output, Inconsistent damage heroes are not going to thrive as well. They're not going to function as well. Uh, and then the answer to what wins games is going to be heroes that can output damage more consistently. Your Soldier, your Sojourn, your Ash, your Cassidy, depending on the patch, uh, Tracer, your Widow if you're good with her. And then usually the only time, usually the only time these other heroes end up into the meta or into the safe pick option is when there's a patch that happens to complement them and they just happen to be played, like the Bastion metas, the Pharah metas or whatnot. Uh, but overall, these are the heroes that are going to do the best in the Overwatch 2 lineup because of the fact that when there's so much high healing, so much consistent healing, so many denial abilities, you need heroes with kits that are versatile enough to provide you uh, that consistent output, that consistent damage, or the high burst. One, if not both, right? Now, this isn't just affecting the DPS roster, though. Like, let's also, because high healing, high, easy healing with no margin for error affects heroes that have inconsistent and lower damage overall, right? If I'm not talking about who DPS, what does that describe? Oh, tank's not fun. Tank isn't enjoyable. Most people just don't want to play tank. People used to like to play tank. Back in my day, tank used to be more fun. And then supports got added to the game. High healing, high, easy AoE healing, consistent sustain. Tanks do low damage and have no real burst. And that's the trade-off of playing tank is there's no burst, right? But the only burst that they had was their ultimates. Land of Fat Shatter, Land of Fat Grab. All of the tank ultimates are countered by basic support abilities. The strength of this role is so powerful that it makes the other roles not fun. The only reason DPS is still fun is because of the fact that it's the only role that can at least cut through the BS that supports have. As long as you have consistent healing, consistent AoE output healing like that, this role is going to suffer. It's not going to be as fun. Now, if you've seen like my video on reworking Kiriko, or if you've had comments with me on like if I've responded to people in comments on like Lifeweaver and stuff, my goal is not to just nerf the support roster. Is to rework their kits in a way that adds more margin for error, but also opens up their kits a lot more and provides them tools in which to defend themselves as well. The problem the problem isn't just nerfing how much they heal. The problem is their kits are designed in a way that directly impact everyone else. In the same way that nerfing Sombra brought Widow back into the mix and made her more oppressive, supports being the way that they are by their kits directly impact how fun tank is. And it's not that, you know, uh it's not that tank is ever not a fun role in games. I think tank is a fun role in a lot of games. I didn't think tank was going to be fun in Marvel Rivals, and as I've played more of it, I've learned to enjoy different heroes on the tank roster. But it's not to say that tank isn't fun. But when you find that someone can sit in the safest position in a game and do and have abilities as strong as your ultimate every 14 seconds, it doesn't feel very rewarding to play. There's no big payoff to playing tank. There's no moment where you're like, ah, yeah, like I helped carry that fight. You're just a punching bag trying to support your team, trying to bait out cooldowns. But ultimately, when you hop on someone and you see that they've made a mistake, but you have low damage output, you get directly countered by anyone who has high consistent healing with no margin for error. Uh, so yeah, like there's other ways to bring heroes up without buffing them. If Junkrat is struggling and his win rate isn't 50%, the goal shouldn't think to yourself like, "Oh, well, how do we increase his burst damage to the point that, he can help out a bit more?" Because that's a slippery slope. The question isn't to me like, "Oh, how can we get him more damage output or increase his projectile size so that way he's more viable?" You gotta ask yourself, well, why are people surviving him already? Why is it that the amount of damage he's doing and whatnot is not enough? And it's because of the fact that if depending on the supports and who Junkrat is playing again, probably changes how effective he is. And if most of the support roster can directly counter anyone who has inconsistent damage, then all of those inconsistent heroes are not going to be viable most of the time. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but whenever supports are made in Overwatch, it's always like, okay, whatever healing they do will just sort of happen automatically, right? Alari's pylon being up indefinitely, just pumping out heals for free, is so strange to me. Like, that's such a frustrating mechanic because then if you don't have consistent damage or burst damage, it's just sort of a direct counter to someone like Junkrat, who is spamming around a corner and who isn't always going to land shot after shot, right? Like, and this is also to say, like, if you suddenly changed the kits of the supports and suddenly made it so there was a higher margin for error, they had to be more selective on like who they chose to heal and when, that could directly buff Junkrat to a point where he might be too powerful. But the problem is the fact that we have done everything we can in Overwatch to address things as they come up instead of asking, how did we get here in the first place? Why is it that people are playing high consistent burst damage and one shot heroes? And the reason why I'm sure people would be hesitant to remove the one shot off of Widow or the burst damage off of heroes is the moment that you do that is the moment stuff doesn't die anymore. And when stuff doesn't die in an FPS game, you're extremely frustrated because of the fact that I'm remembering season 8 and how frustrating that was and how high the healing was and how consistent it was and how strong the supports immortalities were, where it felt like nothing was dying. It didn't matter what you did, you couldn't cut through all of the sustain. So what was the band-aid fix that we were given? Increased projectiles and a DPS passive. But this ultimately is just a band-aid fix to the ultimate core problem, which was all of the supports do AoE healing that is consistent and easy to do. We didn't nerf the supports, we didn't adjust or rework their kits. And it's strange to me because we've reworked Sombra so many times that Sombra mains have played basically like 7 different characters. Sim probably included, right? But the problem in the games, I have very few problems with many of Sombra's or Symmetra's kits. Even when Sombra was perma invis, she was not nearly as bad as what this entire roster has created for everyone else. And instead of like, oh, and also the DPS passive and projectile size change had unintended consequences as well. Because you want to know who that benefited? Uh, Heroes that did consistent damage, uh, especially from a distance, or any sort of consistent damage, especially in DPS. Because like, if the DPS passive is applied every single time someone gets hit with a shot, Tracer, Soldier, Sojourn, Ash, Cassidy, right? You noticing seen a pattern here? Who directly gets hurt by not being able to apply the DPS passive as much? Sombra was probably included in there too with consistent damage, but she was just not often played. And Widowmaker, the only reason she would stand out. Well, this is also the reason why, like, widows are either, like, really good or really bad, is because invisibly, she's not applying the passive as often as everyone else, so if she's not landing her one shots, she is doubly hurting your team because of the fact that everyone else, even if they're not killing someone, are at least applying the passive. Widowmaker, that just makes her even more oppressive because of the fact more feast or famine because of the fact that, uh, if she's hitting her shots, it doesn't matter if the DPS passive is applied, clearly. But if she isn't, then your team is suffering and they can't even tell because of the fact that they can't visibly see the DPS passive, right? And the projectile size change. Who did that directly hurt, right? I remember from SK's video after the projectile size change, she's just like, I can't even flank the backline anymore because it's too much of a risk. Like good tracers and good opponents aren't going to miss me anymore. So I can't take that risk. So all I can do is just hang back and shoot. Instead of nerfing or reworking the kits of the sustain and the supports and how we got here, we tried to band-aid the fixes of season 9, and the only reason season 9 started to feel better was because it was the first time we started to cut through all that sustain. People were starting to die again. And also, the most fun of season 9 was the first 2 weeks when Moira and Lucio were meta. And what do Moira and Lucio have in common? There's no immortality ability. There's more stuff dying. And now as things have changed and they've started to revert and started to go back, we've just gone right back to basically where we were. Is immortalities are back. The game doesn't feel that much different. And I think it's ultimately a step backwards is like the health pool changes directly hurt a lot of other heroes as well. But also, as I've talked in a lot of my other videos, the DPS passive isn't applied is only to the DPS. So the tanks don't get to cut through that sustain. So now tanks sometimes feels like you're able to cut through and kill people, and sometimes it feels like you don't do any damage at all. And the reason why is because of the fact that as a tank player, you don't get to see who the passive is applied to. So sometimes you're shooting at someone and you see them drop, and it's because somebody happened to hit them with the passive. Other times, uh, you're attacking someone and you feel like they should die, but then they don't and they still live with one health. And you're like, what was I supposed to do? But you couldn't tell the difference between those two times. This is why the passive is such a garbage idea. It's such a terrible, uh, it's a terrible solution to the problem of sustain, right? And it's just like we're trying to make damage feel more unique. We're trying to make damage feel like damage and tank feel like tank and support feel like support. But the problem is supports, if all they do is sit back and heal, that's still very rewarding to the support player. Even if that's the only thing that they do is it still feels rewarding. Damage gets the DPS passive, so everything dies faster in their hands and they specifically get to do that. That feels very rewarding because it's an FPS game. People want to be able to kill stuff. And then there's tank. What do tanks do? Oh, they have more health. They have reduced CC. Uh, and they charge ults less and they take less headshot damage. It's like, okay, but they don't have something like the DPS passive, so their damage output is far lower, and the only thing they're good at is being shot, punched, booped, slept, and repeatedly beaten to death. Who wants to play that? How are you going to sit there and say tanks are countered by supports and uh, their basic abilities and all support abilities immediately guarantee value? DPS are going to be the only ones allowed to kill any stuff. Tank ultimates are non-threatening, and also, tank players need to shut up and stop whining. Oh, and the most effective way to deal with other enemy tanks is no longer outplaying them, but counter swapping them because of the fact that the health pools are so much larger now, and the sustain is so high, and the immortalities that reset fights are so easy to do and so powerful that you get more benefit out of just counter swapping than you do trying to outplay the opponent in front of you because of the fact that even if you see someone make a mistake on the counter that you're going up against, they have so much health that it's difficult to kill them before uh before they get healed back up. Plus, you don't have like a way to cut through the sustain like the DPS passive. Plus, an immortality will be there to stop you. even if you get anywhere close. And if you cut through that immortality, sometimes there's a second immortality to cut through. You see where I'm going with all this? Like, the reason why projectiles heroes in Overwatch are less fun to play is the same reason that like tanks are not fun to play. As long as you have consistent healing output, as long as you have that sort of high, easy output from a range with no trade off, like Lifeweaver, pop, 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 pop. Like, what are you as like a Winston or something supposed to do against that? How do you feel like you can capitalize on someone's said mistake? So, yeah, I hope this is like made people realize that when we're talking about like counters in Overwatch, a lot of people are like, oh, Ana counters Roadhog or Ryan counters Zarya. But it's like, it's not just that. It's consistent damage in Overwatch, consistent damage and burst damage in Overwatch as it is right now, just does more. So you're going to see more of it. If you don't like one shots and you want to see other heroes get played more often, if you don't like seeing Widowmaker in all of your games, you don't need to nerf the one shot. You need to make sure the other heroes have the ability to be played. You want to make sure that other heroes are just as viable as these heroes that do consistent damage output all the time or burst damage. Because as long as you have supports with all of these supports with auto aim abilities, no margin for error, and consistent high healing output, you're going to need consistent damage in order to take care of that. Uh, so yeah, like it's not just the immortalities. It's the support roster as is, and it's not that tank isn't fun. I think tank is a great role in Overwatch. I think that by design, heroes like Junker Queen are a ton of fun. I've even played some Doomfist and found him fun. It's not that tank isn't a fun role. It's just you don't have high enough damage and you don't have powerful enough ults to make it feel fun. Not when, you know, you're playing Junker Queen and the enemy team just switches to Kiriko and all you have to do before every single fight is bait the Suzu. And even if you bait the Suzu, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best time to ult. But sometimes you have to take it because otherwise you're not going to get that window again. You know, and I've talked about this a bunch before, uh but yeah, the tank role is not an unfun role. It's just that supports are too strong in general. And there are supports that are I think well designed. I think that Lucio, Zenyatta, Mercy, and Ana still fit the game rather well. But if you're going to have high healing output from a range, there needs to be a margin for error. So people like that need to be, support heroes like that need to be fixed. If you want to see heroes, do well, like projectiles and stuff like that too, then high AoE healing that's invisible that you can't see, or just setting up a turtling situation where there's just like, you press a button and there's just high healing from a turret just automatically pumping heals into your team, or more just auto aim heals from a distance. Like, you see where I'm going. Like, every other hero has a larger margin for error. The margin for error on support is so low that it's really not that difficult. That's why a lot of people can go from playing DPS to playing support with relative ease. When you're used to playing with a much higher margin for error on either one of the two roles, you go to support and suddenly it feels super chill. It's the reason why people queue up for support. It's the reason why it's the most popular role. It's far less stressful and you can get just as much value, if not more. So, yeah. If you wonder why projectile heroes suck, it's because there's inconsistent damage coming. They are inconsistent damage in a game that's all about high consistent healing with high denial. Like, I don't want if you wanna see Junkrat, May, and all of these other heroes, like, and more heroes like them, more unique ones with projectiles and stuff, you gotta lower how much consistent healing output is in the game because otherwise, if you're frustrated about consistent damage and burst damage now, like, I'm sorry, but, like, right now, that's the only way to win the games, so you're just gonna see more of those, and nerfing them isn't going to make the game better. Uh, it's just gonna make it more frustrating because of the fact that then it's just nothing's gonna die, and high deaths in a game is not a bad thing. In fact, I'd even wager to say it's better than high sustain because of the fact that it's a video game. At the end of the day, you wanna feel like you're getting kills, you wanna feel like you're having an impact, and, uh nerfing continuously nerfing stuff that kills things is what got us here, and that's the reason why, like, what we need to do for a lot of Overwatch to this is a bigger conversation, but to save Overwatch right now, it's not the projectile sizes that needs to change. It's not that health pools, although ultimately, I think we should revert everything from season 9 and sort of start over, but it needs a massive rework to the system design of some of these heroes in order to allow the other heroes to thrive again, in order for the other heroes to feel better again. If you want to save Overwatch and actually get people to come back to it, you need a massive overhaul in how the game feels and how it plays. Because a game about sustain is not fun, and that's what we have now. Games about getting lots of kills and lots of big attacks and lots of wacky combinations is fun, and Marvel Rivals has proven that. Is and also Marvel Rivals has also proven how triple support with their high sustain is not fun. So, bring back Overwatch's damage, nerf the sustain, make support heroes have a higher margin for error with less AoE healing and auto aim abilities, and watch as suddenly players will come back, and watch as Widowmaker has played less and Junkrats are played more and May is played more because yeah, like, it's not as simple as just being like, "Oh, we just need to buff these heroes or nerf these heroes." It's like, no. There are heroes in the game whose kits fundamentally stop you from playing, the game at all, and that's what needs to be changed. But that's the reason why I think that Overwatch could still be saved. It's just it's in a bad spot right now, but until someone actually sort of, like, makes this connection and wants to take that risk at Blizzard, it's just gonna keep going down the path it's going. But I don't know. We're 3 days away currently. This is 2/9 that I'm making this, and yeah, if maybe there's a big announcement on the 12th, but, we'll see. Maybe I'll wait and I'll make a video then, seeing what their massive changes are. But anyway, yeah, um, that's why projectile heroes suck now.